I spent 34 years building that house. Not just paying for it, building it. Weekends with my brother-in-law pouring the back patio. 3 summers replacing every window myself because I didn't trust contractors. The kitchen cabinets I sanded and stained by hand the winter my wife was pregnant with our daughter, Patricia. I wanted everything perfect before the baby came. I wanted her to grow up somewhere solid. My wife Louise passed 11 years ago. Breast cancer, fast and quiet, the way she did everything. After she was gone, the house got bigger. Not in square footage, in silence. I learned to cook for one. I learned which lights to leave on so it didn't feel empty when I came home from my evening walk. I was 62 years old, retired from 30 years at the County Water Authority, living alone in a 4-bedroom house in Flagstaff, Arizona. My daughter Patricia lived in Phoenix, 2 hours south. We talked every Sunday. She'd married a man named Todd about 6 years prior. I'll be honest, I never warmed to him completely. He had this way of listening to you that made you feel like he was already calculating something. But Patricia loved him and she was happy, so I kept my opinions to myself. Their daughter, my granddaughter Ivy, was 13 at the time this story starts. She was the best of both of them, somehow. Patricia's patience, none of Todd's edge. She'd call me on her own sometimes, not just when her mother handed her the phone. That meant something. In the spring of that year, Patricia called on a Tuesday. Not our usual Sunday. "Dad," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about it before you answer." I turned the stove off. When your daughter starts a conversation that way, you pay attention. She explained that Todd's company had lost a major contract. He was still employed, but his commission was gone, nearly half their income. Their mortgage was underwater. Their savings were thin. And their landlord in Phoenix had just raised the rent significantly. They needed a place to land while they stabilized. 6 months, she said. Maybe 8. They would pay something toward utilities, help around the house. Ivy would finish 8th grade online. I looked around my kitchen. 4 bedrooms. 1 old man. "When do you need to move in?" I asked. She started crying before she could answer. They arrived on a Saturday in April. Todd's truck was loaded. Patricia's car was loaded. I'd cleared out the 2 spare bedrooms, put fresh linens on the beds, made space in the hall closet. I'd even stocked the kitchen with things I knew Patricia liked. The specific brand of coffee she grew up drinking, orange juice with pulp, the crackers she used to eat after school. The first 2 weeks were fine. Quiet. Todd was on job calls most of the day. Patricia helped me with some yard work I'd been putting off. Ivy and I played cards after dinner, and she beat me at gin rummy 7 times in a row, which I allowed approximately twice, and then genuinely could not stop. The cracks started small. The way cracks always do. Todd began leaving his work things spread across the dining room table. Every morning I'd come downstairs, and his laptop and papers and charging cables had colonized what had been my space for 3 decades. I moved them to one end. He'd spread back out by afternoon. I didn't say anything. 6 months, I told myself. Then he rearranged the living room. I came home from my Thursday morning walk, and the armchair, Louise's armchair, the one she used to sit in to read, the one I had never moved an inch in 11 years, was shoved into the corner. The couch had been pulled forward. Todd had set up his monitor on the coffee table. "Better light from this angle," he told me when I stood there looking at it. I moved the armchair back that evening while he was in the shower. He moved it again the next morning. I moved it back. He didn't mention it. Neither did I. But I noticed Patricia watching us from the kitchen doorway. Not saying anything, just watching. That was the thing about the early months. A lot of not saying anything. Todd had opinions about how I loaded the dishwasher, about the thermostat. He kept turning it up 2 degrees. I kept turning it back. About my truck, which he borrowed twice without asking and returned once with the gas tank nearly empty. I mentioned that one time, as calmly as I could. He said he'd been meaning to fill it up and just forgot. He forgot a lot of things. He forgot that the Wi-Fi password was mine to give, not his to share with his college friend, who stayed a weekend in my guest room without anyone asking me. He forgot that the garage space next to mine was where I kept my woodworking tools. not a place to park his second set of tires and 3 boxes of his old college trophies. He forgot, it seemed, whose name was on the mortgage. The 6 months came and went. I raised it gently with Patricia in September. She teared up, said Todd was close to landing something, said she was so sorry, asked if I could give them until January. What was I going to do? She was my daughter. Ivy was enrolled in school by then. Real school, locally. I'd enrolled her myself, driven her to orientation, met her homeroom teacher. Pulling them out felt like pulling Ivy out of something that was working. January, I said. October arrived. Then November. Todd's something had not landed, though he was vague about the specifics whenever I asked. Patricia had taken a part-time job at a dental office, which she mentioned once and never again, like she was embarrassed about it. I wasn't sure why. Working is working. Then came Thanksgiving. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened at Thanksgiving. I cooked that meal. I drove to 3 different stores to get what I needed. I was on my feet from 7 in the morning. Turkey, stuffing made from scratch with a recipe Louise's mother had written on an index card in 1987. Sweet potatoes, green bean casserole, 2 pies. I set the table myself, with the good dishes, the ones Louise and I had gotten as a wedding gift that I'd only ever used on holidays. Patricia offered to help multiple times. I told her I had it. It was my kitchen, my table, my Thanksgiving. That was the one thing I still had completely, unambiguously mine, and I wanted to keep it that way. Todd spent the morning watching football on the couch and talking loudly on his phone in the hallway about something to do with a business contact. At one point, he came into the kitchen, lifted the lid on the turkey baster, and said, "You know they make electric ones that do this automatically." I said, "I know." He went back to the couch. Ivy came into the kitchen around noon and sat on the counter the way Patricia used to when she was small, keeping me company, asking about Thanksgiving traditions. I told her about the first Thanksgiving her mother could remember, when Louise had accidentally used salt instead of sugar in the cranberry sauce. And nobody said a word about it because they didn't want to hurt her feelings. And we all ate it, and nobody ever forgot. And it became the best family joke for 20 years. Ivy laughed until her eyes watered. That was the best part of the day. The meal was ready at 2. I called everyone in. Patricia came right away, started helping carry dishes. Ivy was already at the table. Todd came in from the living room unhurried, still on his phone, and sat down at the head of the table. I want you to understand something. In 34 years of living in that house, I had always sat at the head of that table. It was not a negotiation. It was not a rule I'd ever had to state because it had never needed to be stated. The head of the table is where I sat, where I carved the turkey, where Louise used to look at me from the other end. I came out of the kitchen carrying the turkey on the platter, and Todd was sitting in my chair. I set the platter down. I didn't say anything yet. I pulled out the chair to his left, my usual other option, still a fine seat, and Todd looked up from his phone and said, without lowering it, "Actually, I've got my charger over here, so I'm going to need that outlet. You mind sitting across?" He pointed to the far end of the table. Ivy looked at her plate. Patricia said very quietly, "Todd." He said, "What? There's more room at that end anyway." Then into his phone he said, "No, go ahead, I'm listening." I stood there holding the back of that chair for what felt like a full minute. I'm 66 years old. I am not a man who raises his voice. Louise used to say that was my best quality and also sometimes my worst one, that I processed things slowly, held them too long before I let them out. She was right. I have a long fuse. I've never been sure if that's patience or cowardice, and I've spent a lot of years trying to figure out which. That afternoon, standing at the Thanksgiving table in my own house with a turkey I had cooked for 7 hours, I decided it wasn't either one. It was just a fuse. And it had finally burned down. I set the chair back in. I walked back to the kitchen. I opened the drawer next to the refrigerator where I keep the important papers, the ones I can find in a hurry. I found what I needed. I walked back to the dining room doorway. "Todd," I said. He looked up. "I'm going to need you to leave my house. There was a silence. Patricia looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Dad, not today, I said. I mean, formally. I'd like you out by January 15th. That's 60 days. I'm going to put it in writing. Todd laughed. Actually laughed. 60 days. I'm going to put it in writing. Todd laughed. 60 days. Okay, and where exactly are we supposed to go in 60 days? That's not something I'm able to help you with, I said. What I can tell you is that this is my home. I've lived here since 1990, and you've been a guest in it since April. A guest who just told me where to sit at my own Thanksgiving table. I didn't tell you anything. I just said there's more room, Todd. I was surprised by how calm I sounded. I'm not arguing with you. I'm informing you. I put the papers on the counter, served myself a plate of the meal I had cooked, and ate it in the kitchen. Patricia came in twice. The first time she was crying and angry and said I was overreacting, and this wasn't fair to Ivy. The second time she sat down across from me and didn't say anything for a while, and then she said, Dad, I know he was wrong. I know you know, I said. I just don't know what we're going to do. You're going to figure it out, I said. The same way you've always figured things out. You're smart, and you're capable, and you don't need to live in my house to do it. She cried again. I reached over and held her hand. I love you more than anything, I said. That's not changing. But this is. The next morning, I called my attorney, a man I've worked with for 15 years. He drafted a formal notice. Proper, legal, with the correct language and timeline. I had it served before the end of the week. I know some people would say that was excessive for a family situation. Maybe it was, but I'd learned in 7 months that verbal agreements in that house had a short shelf life. Todd's response, delivered through Patricia, was that I was a bitter old man, taking out my grief over Louise on my daughter's family. I thought about that for a few days. I sat with it the way you have to sit with things that might be true. It wasn't true. What was true was that I had been patient to a fault, that I had said nothing about the armchair, the dining table, the truck, the guest in my spare room, the thermostat, the garage. I had said nothing because I wanted to help my daughter, and I'd confused helping with surrendering. Those are different things. It took me 7 months to learn that again. January 15th came. They were out on January 12th, 3 days early, which surprised me. Patricia told me later that Todd had found an apartment in Scottsdale. I asked how he could afford it when they couldn't afford their Phoenix place. She hesitated. He had some money set aside, she said, for emergencies. I didn't ask more questions. Some answers make you angrier, and I was trying to be done being angry. Ivy called me on January 13th, not from Patricia's phone, from her own. Grandpa, she said, I just wanted to say I'm sorry about all of it. You don't have anything to be sorry about all of it, I told her. I know you had to do it, she said. I don't think it was wrong. She was 14 years old. Somehow she had seen the whole thing more clearly than the adults in the room. I told her I'd come to Scottsdale in the spring. We'd go to a Diamondbacks game if she wanted. She said she'd think about it, but she was smiling. I could hear it. The house was quiet again after they left. Differently quiet than before. Not the heavy quiet of someone being gone forever, but the ordinary quiet of a place that belonged to itself again. I moved Louise's armchair back to where it had always been. I made coffee. I sat in the kitchen with the morning light coming through the window I'd installed in 2003, and I thought about the index card in my drawer. Louise's mother's stuffing recipe in handwriting I will never throw away. What I've learned, or maybe remembered, because I think I always knew it, is that a home is not just a building. It's a set of agreements about how people treat each other. And when those agreements stop being honored, it doesn't matter whose name is on the deed if you don't act like it. I acted like it. Later than I should have. But I acted. There is a photo on my refrigerator of Ivy and me from 2 Christmases ago, before any of this happened. She's got one of my old woodworking tools in her hand, and she's looking at it like it might tell her something. I look at it every morning when I get my coffee. Some things you protect, not with anger, with clarity. That's what I should have found sooner. That's what I hope she finds before she has to learn it the hard way. Stay with me. There's more coming. I've thought a lot about what took me so long. Not in a self-punishing way, I'm past that. But honestly, looking back at those 7 months, what I see is a man who kept choosing the path of least friction and calling it kindness. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself I was helping my daughter. And both of those things were partially true. But underneath them was something else I didn't want to name. I was afraid of what it would cost me to say something. That's not wisdom. That's avoidance wearing wisdom's clothes. What I know now is that every time I didn't speak up about the armchair, the truck, the stranger sleeping in my guest room, I wasn't keeping the peace. I was teaching Todd that the peace was free, that there were no consequences in my house, that I would absorb whatever came my way and rearrange myself around it. And people, when they're given that lesson long enough, they stop even noticing they're learning it. That's what happened. By November, Todd genuinely didn't think he'd done anything wrong sitting at the head of my table, because I'd never shown him where the line was. That's on me. Not entirely. He made his choices, and a grown man who borrows someone's truck without asking doesn't need to be told that's wrong. But the pattern? The slow creep of it? I let that happen by staying quiet one too many times. The thing about Ivy is that she saw it without any of the noise adults carry. She was 14, and she called me the day after they moved out and said she didn't think what I did was wrong. A 14-year-old with more clarity than everyone else in the room. I think about that a lot. Children absorb what they observe. She was living in that house too, watching how adults handle or don't handle the moments that actually matter. What would she have taken away if I'd kept going? That the person being mistreated is the one who's supposed to keep adjusting? That's a terrible lesson to send a kid into adulthood with. What I did, finally, late, but still, was refuse to keep teaching it. There's a version of this story where I feel heroic. I don't feel that way. I feel like a man who found his footing about 6 months after he lost it, and who was fortunate that the damage was repairable. Patricia and I still talk. Ivy still calls me on her own. That's not something I take for granted. It could have gone differently. What I believe, based on nothing more profound than 66 years of living, is that the way you treat the people who can't easily retaliate tells you everything about your character. Todd treated me the way he did because I had made myself easy to push, not because I was weak. I've never been weak, but because I'd confused accommodation with love. They're not the same. Real love sometimes looks like a piece of paper with 60 days written on it. Real love sometimes means your daughter cries, and you hold her hand anyway and say, "This is changing." Moral courage isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's just the moment you stop letting what's wrong continue, because continuing feels easier than stopping it. I found that moment standing at my own Thanksgiving table, holding the back of a chair that was mine. I just wish I'd found it at the armchair. Would have saved us all a few months.